Hi, and welcome to another edition of IndieBiz EDU with Portland by Local. I'm Amy Landry, board president. We're excited to be here today at Botanically Curious again for this event. We've got three amazing speakers, and we're talking about peri and postmenopause at work, a topic that is very near and dear to, I think, many of it's my heart and those of a lot of other women women and men in the room. Men, you need to care about this as well. You are managing women that are going through this transition, and this transition can last for 20 years, 35 to 55, really. So you need to be paying attention to. So thank you to Maine Community Bank. As always, they are our sponsor for the entire series and have been with us since the beginning of this series 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now that we've been doing it. Portland Downtown, they sponsored our raffle and the chairs that our attendees are sitting on today. And Botanically Curious, like I already mentioned, they're going to be doing a raffle for the women in the room. Sorry if you're on the computer, but you can come to the shop sometime perhaps and see all of the great herbal goodies that are here. So with that, I will hand it off to our speakers to introduce themselves. Starting with Lori.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. I'm Lori Mitchell. Currently, I am at Unum, and I've been there for about 9.5 years. I oversee global well-being and health. So everything population health, from prevention, risk reduction, disease management, on-site resources, digital, virtual resources for the employees, about 10,000 employees at Unum. I'm also a registered dietitian nutritionist, so I come with that background, and while I don't really practice nutrition anymore, I certainly bring that skill set and knowledge to my practice of population health. And prior to Unum, I was at Maine Health for 11 years, and I've really been doing population health work for almost 30 years now. It's really a pleasure to be here, and Amy, thank you for raising this topic. It really has become a priority in the workplace, I'd say, in the last 2 years. So looking forward to the discussion.
Hello, I'm Allison Poole. I'm the founder of Koru Physical Therapy and Wellness, which is currently going under a rebrand as we speak. So just to help reflect the more holistic support that I offer women, specifically in midlife. Through my private practice, I offer integrative wellness coaching, pelvic health physical therapy, and I lead it's called the Pause Together Community, which is an online membership space for women in midlife. I have been practicing for over 20 years, and my practice has certainly evolved quite a bit over the last 20 years, but essentially I really help women who are feeling alone, disconnected from their bodies, and just kind of stuck in this never-ending cycle of trial and error, to really feeling supported, feeling clear, understanding what is going on in their bodies and what it means for them and their lives, so that they can, not only, establish healthy habits that stick, but really, essentially live their best midlife. I think it's exciting to see that. I think there's a lot of talk, obviously, about menopause and perimenopause, but it's still kind of in this very oh, menopause, I call it the moaning menopause. And, really trying to shift that narrative to this is actually a really exciting opportunity, and it's an opportunity that you can just just design this next half. Women live half their lives in postmenopause, and so it's an opportunity to kind of do things differently. So, yeah, I'm excited to be here, and obviously we spend a lot of time at work, so it's important to kind of help support ourselves while we're doing that. So thank you.
Hi, I'm the other Allison Gray. We hang out a lot, so you get the two Allisons today. My name is Allison Gray. I am the founder and owner of North Star Holistic Medicine. I'm a functional medicine nurse practitioner. I've been practicing medicine for about 20 years, 10 years as an NP, 10 years as an RN in labor and delivery before that, so I've kind of been in the world. I teach holistic health classes at USM as well. And I work with so many women who are going through these changes, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, as they are navigating these changes, and a lot of information about how to navigate it in the workplace comes up, and how things are challenging and how that shows up. And so many times women don't have good support. They don't even know what's going on, and they think they're going crazy or something's wrong, and it's truly just this very normal biological change that happens in our bodies. So I'm really, really excited and grateful to be here, and also really happy to see so many women here, and women who have influence and connections in the kind of more corporate world, to be able to start to bring this support in the way that it needs to be presented, for all of our well-being. So thanks for all of you for being here too.
Excellent. So just a note for those of you in the audience and online, we will be taking questions. We're going to leave lots of room for questions. So write them down. If you're online with us, feel free to put them in the chat as they come to your mind, and we'll get to them when we get to that section of the event. So first question I ask everyone, my icebreaker, is what was the last locally owned independent business that you visited, and why you love them?
Oh, wow. So for me, I think it was Portland Trading Company and Kazim's store. One of my favorites. I love his designs and how he curates his shop. And he's super friendly. I can go in there to shop around, and I end up staying for an hour and a half talking with him.
Well, the Rosemont Market is right next to my office, so I pretty much go there daily for my coffee and sometimes a treat. And they're just so friendly, and obviously their mission of supporting local farmers and other local businesses. So just a win-win-win.
I live in Gray, and there is a cute little shop that just opened and expanded into a coffee shop bakery. So local centric is more recent discovery, and I just want to put a plug in for them, because they carry a lot of local artists, they carry a lot of local like arts and crafts, and they just expanded to offer delicious drinks, and I'm really excited. They're close to home. So I'll put in a plug for them.
Excellent. And for those that just joined us, or for anyone, bathroom is right here to the right, and we've got coffee, tea, and snacks. So feel free to get up and get them whenever you want to. We won't bother us. Mm-hmm. So let's start with a quick definition of perimenopause and menopause, and a quick, very quick overview of symptoms and timeline. So I don't know. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to start.
I'm happy to do it.
Go for
So the first important thing to say is there is no actual definition of perimenopause, but a lot of providers or people realize they're there just kind of based on timing and symptoms. But to be specific, as women, our hormones start to decline even in our 30s. And at some point, it crosses a threshold where symptoms become more noticeable. There's a lot of other factors that influence how those symptoms show up and how loud they get and how quickly that happens. But the definition for menopause is more specific. So the definition for menopause is you have been without a period for 1 full year, and there's a blood marker we can do called follicle stimulating hormone, and it's basically how your brain talks to your ovaries, and that number increases as you get closer to and in menopause, which is crazy because that means the brain is saying, hey, kick out an egg, and it's like, what are you trying to do here? But we're really wired, for survival. So the measurement, so for some women, let's say they have a hormonal IUD and they're not having cycles. How would you know if you are having a period or not? This is where this gets really confusing. But the ability to do that marker is one helpful thing. So that is a specific definition. Perimenopause is a lot more vague, and I think as women are getting this information and saying, I want to know about this and understand, it's hard because you're looking out there. But I would say most women, it's probably considered, in your 40s, as hormones decline and you start developing things like poor sleep, maybe hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, low libido, maybe some weight gain, brain fog. Those are the things, just to touch on a few. There's far more.
Periods.
Irregular periods, thank you. Yeah, those are the really obvious ones that show up. But again, it's not a specific definition. So it falls in that category, but it's a little more ambiguous.
Anything to add?
No. And then everything after that menopause birth date, you're in postmenopause.
Congratulations.
Celebrate.
I think back to when I was in my 40s, and as I've sort of come to understand more about menopause and perimenopause, what perimenopause was when I started having night sweats, disrupted sleep, and as we were talking earlier, everything kind of cascades from sleep or not sleeping, right? Your mood, your ability to concentrate. And I thought, and even my irritability, I'm like, wow, why was I so irritable with my kids? And I mean, they could be irritating sometimes, but I think there are all of these things I now reflect back on, understanding what some of those vasomotor symptoms were. And just how and I thought I could exercise my way out of it, or meditate my way out of it, or yoga my way out of it, or, eat a healthy diet. And yes, we should all still do those things, but, it didn't quite do the trick.
Yeah, it's confusing when you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So how do those common symptoms then affect, how have you seen it affect women in the workplace? What are those symptoms that they're bringing to work?
Well, I think, the brain fog, the inability to concentrate, all those vasomotor symptoms that, half of women are going to experience in the workplace. And if you work full time, about 60% of your waking hours are spent at work, and maybe more for some of you. So it can be really, really disruptive. And I think that most women are kind of, or have been, maybe up until recently, sort of suffering in silence. And maybe not getting the support and care they need from their providers. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can get into, but we do know that women actually leave the workforce because of menopausal symptoms. And that's a problem. That's a problem for income, retirement, and it's a problem for employers. It's very expensive to attract and retain talent, and when you think about women who are in their 40s and 50s and the expertise and experience that they come with, it's a big loss to an organization if they leave the workplace.
Yeah, and I think the other factor is, when women are experiencing all of these things, maybe they're not really sure what's going on. They're trying to do all these things to help, like exercise and meditate themselves out of it, but also just kind of pushing through. And we know that the more stress we experience, and just that stress of oh, I'm not performing, or am I going to have a hot flash in the middle of this meeting, or I really didn't sleep last night, I really don't want to go to work. All of those things just compound. And so the more stressed we are, the worse our symptoms are. So it is this kind of vicious cycle. And so I think that piece of just the stress of the symptoms and what women are experiencing just make everything so much worse.
It's a snowball effect, for sure. And again, compounded by not knowing and not having good information. I think it's such a weird time because a lot of women, whether you have children at home or not, it's like you're coming into this kind of wisdom and you have more time and you can devote maybe a little more to work. And then a lot of women are hit with these hormonal symptoms that keep them from maybe fully expressing that. And worsened by no one's talking about it and you feel like you have to hide it, or you don't know what's going on and you feel like there's something wrong with you or you're not competent. I see things show up a lot in the way of memory and cognitive function. And so women who know that they are capable and can excel at things or things they did no problem. I had someone who's a pharmacist a few weeks ago, and she told me she's been using the same code on her door for like 10 years. And she went to go lock up one night and couldn't remember the code to the point where she had to call security. And that, I think, was her catalyst for reaching out. But that wasn't a matter of her capability. It was this piece that was happening because of a hormone deficiency, which she might not have felt comfortable to say that because people are going to be like, are you fit for this job, right? So it can be really serious. But even just people knowing that, they have this capacity and can't fully express it, that's really difficult.
So what symptoms, I think you kind of touched on it, but what symptoms might women, overlook at work? You mentioned that you're just realizing, in the last few years what the symptoms were.
Well, I mean, things like the, hot flashes are, probably the most common, but the brain fog, the inability to concentrate, the irritability. I think also if some women have very severe hot flashes and they can last for years. And again, this is very individual, but women having to leave meetings because of that, and it's really, really difficult. And I think that there's a lot that employers can do to start to think about how do you start the conversation, provide educational materials. Anyone who's sat next to me at Unum for the last 2 years has certainly heard me talk about menopause. We have open workspace. They've heard about vaginal atrophy. They've heard about, you name it, the whole spectrum. And what happens is when people hear you talking about these things, then they start to come up to you and say, oh, are we going to have a program in place? Will we have educational materials? Is there information out there? Where do I go? So just initiating that conversation at work really helps women to feel like they're not alone. They can start to talk about the various symptoms that they're experiencing because, to Allison's point, both Allisons, it's different for everybody, right? And some symptoms are really obvious, some are less so. I think the sleep thing is something that, and getting back to sleep is probably one of the more common things that I hear about. In addition to the vasomotor stuff that comes along.
And for work, I've heard a lot about the brain fog and the cognitive function and productivity. So, do you want to, as the clinicians, or talk about what you've seen and what are those effects?
Do you want? I think with the sleep piece, that is that's a big contributing factor. There's a lot, and this is the tricky part, right? Because I think right now our medical system is set up to be like, this issue gets this fix, right? And it's a one-stop deal, and that's just not how it is. I think like what Allison was talking about before too is the underlying factors that turn the volume up on symptoms are very much missed, I think, in that setting in medicine. But in work, brain fog, memory stuff, the compounding factor of sleep, the tricky part is sometimes when you're just becoming, when your hormones are just changing and you start getting night sweats but not realizing not enough to wake up, and that disrupts your sleep. And usually like low progesterone can contribute to that too. But like you said, you might wake up, not go back to sleep. That's going to cause a lot more challenge for having cognitive function that's where you would like it to be, and just the hormones themselves that also contribute to that. A couple symptoms I'd throw out there that people really don't often associate with hormone changes that are just starting to get a little more press. One is cardiovascular symptoms. So heart palpitations, arrhythmias, that's scary, right? And so if you're at work and you're getting these things and you're worried that something major is going on, and you might need to feel like you need to go somewhere and get it checked out, and you have to take time off, and you have to go to, get a stress test and go see this doctor. You go through the gamut, no one telling you, oh, that's normal when estrogen drops, right? So it's not just the symptoms itself, but it's also the management of that. And the other thing, I think, like vertigo, that kind of thing, a lot of women experience these things, and it's not shared with them that it's not optimal. It's normal with hormone changes. There are tools we have, but it is something that can happen. And lastly, I want to say this, because this is something I think that probably impacts women a lot, depending on the kind of work they do, is joint and muscle pain, body pain. So if you're not sleeping well and then you're not feeling good, are you really able to kind of be your best self at work? And they just came up with this new diagnosis code to help women, but it's musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. Just saying, hey, we can get you insurance coverage if you have body pain to get hormone therapy, because it's such a big factor. Those are big ones for how present you can be, at work.
What are some of the lower cost accommodations and interventions that you're seeing employers put into place?
Well, something that's no cost is a policy. Yeah. And there are a lot of model policies out there that you can search for. A lot of work's been done in the UK around this, and they're probably a little bit further ahead when it comes to that than the US is, but I think we're not far behind. And then making sure that you do have accommodations for your employees, whether it's opening windows or the ability to control temperature and light, offering fans. We did a women's health fair yesterday, and women's health and mental health, because it's both Mental Health Awareness Month and Women's Health Month. And these are little teeny fans that you can carry around with you. You could also just have one at your workstation or, wherever you are. Ice packs, that you can have, at the ready. They can also be used for heat, but I think when it comes to menopause, it's usually ice. So those are some of the low cost things that employers are doing, but also just information. Again, having the conversation, having information posted in restrooms. If you do have resources through your medical provider, make sure that people are aware of those. All the major carriers today do have virtual menopause, perimenopause providers. So that includes Aetna, United Healthcare, Cigna. They all have virtual providers that are generally very easy to access, and appointments are you can get fairly quickly. And then there are and a lot of those providers also you can go to directly. And now they're not necessarily free, but they may be lower cost. And if it's virtual care, for some people that can be a lot more convenient, and it doesn't mean you have to take a day off from work or time off from work to get care. And we have some resources, right, Amy, that we're going to send out?
Yeah, after the fact,
Yeah,
we'll gather some resources and send everyone an
um,
email that registered.
And there are a lot out there. MIDI is one. They have this cool T-shirt that says menopause is hot. But there are many others out there. And I think the accessibility and the conversation, the policies, all of those things are important for employers to do.
Yeah, I think some other ones would be, we talk about joint and muscle pain and that sort of thing, but also just, making sure that your workstation is set up appropriately, just having, making sure that, especially if you're working from home, you're not working crisscross applesauce on your couch, hunched over, all of these things that, again, compound. So if we're set up well in our workstations, if you're not a desk job, if you're standing behind a bar or, at a countertop, having those anti-fatigue mats can be really helpful. If there's uniforms required, making sure there's some light, clothing options or, ability to change, having, ability to change lights. Some people, if it's bright, they're able to focus better versus that could be irritating to others. So having that, I think just that flexibility to change things up as we need to versus, again, just pushing through. And I think the conversation, and just starting that conversation, having that open dialogue and, just being curious. I think, I've done some talks for some big corporations and, this one male supervisor, he spoke up and he was like, I had this woman who was my assistant, and all of a sudden she started really dropping the ball and calling in sick, and he, was like, I just had no idea what was going on, and we finally just had this conversation, and she was like, yeah, I'm these are all these things that are going through. And once they just had that conversation, he's like, okay, let's figure out how we can better, support you. And it just made all the difference, just getting it out and talking about it versus trying to hide it. And, so I think that just that dialogue and that, that culture around it, not stigmatizing it and just this is a normal, natural thing that's happening. How can we support it out in the open versus behind closed doors,
sweating,
sweating, and trying to put your ice packs on in the bathroom.
I feel even what you do, right? Not to throw you out there, but I could see you facilitate so beautifully because you have such great clinical experience, but someone like you or you, where someone who can bring all the stressors, right? How are we showing up in our life that these volume buttons can be turned up, just managing our stress and our demands. I think we take on a lot, especially as women, and Allison does a great job with helping people figure out, where can we let some of that go? But I think about that in a corporate setting of what if once a month they had a group meeting of all the women just at lunch, maybe it's virtual, and someone like you facilitating that conversation with the people who might need to hear that in the higher up, areas who want to learn about it. Just having that group discussion, that can be huge. Having a way to get information and not feel so alone, that can be huge. And then that can facilitate, people connecting at work to talk more about things. And again, I think, I would imagine, I like to imagine that men like to support this. They just they don't have this experience. They don't know. And we as women, I think, just kind of take a lot on and don't talk about it. So, helping people understand across all, all the aspects of the workforce, But the other piece I want to bring up too is that there's a lot of hormonal changes that happen that are not technically eligible for something like estrogen as a therapy. So you could be having really heavy periods, you could be not sleeping, anxiety, gut health issues, all those going on. And if you speak with someone who's a menopause expert, they might say like, oh, okay, if you don't check these boxes, and they're right, you don't need that hormone necessarily. But I would say that for employers, one thing that might be good is resourcing who are the providers in the area, whether there's online people or if they're not eligible for like a menopausal treatment plan. There are a lot of people out there who help with those perimenopausal changes, and finding, can we just give a list of these are the providers or practices in the area that someone could reach out to? A lot of providers, like I do free consultations, right? Like if someone even just has questions, a lot of providers do that. So at least they could even have a discussion about, this is what's going on. Is this even something that could be helpful? There are a lot of women that would fall through the cracks that don't qualify for that menopausal, definition.
I think a couple of things that were raised here about, the men in our lives, right? The men in our lives, whether they're in the workplace and are, managers or co-workers, they all have women in their lives too outside of the workplace, right? They have spouses, they have sisters, they have mothers, they have aunts. So men need to be part of this conversation as well. It's really, really important. So whatever conversations you're having in the workplace, bring them home. My husband's heard more about this topic also in the last 2 years as I've gotten more educated. And
my 16-year-old son could probably sit up here and do this talk.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch the expressions and the understanding and the processing happen, because they likely don't know anything about this either. And that's unfortunate. So I'm glad that there are some men here in person, and I'm sure watching. Yeah, I'm sure watching this from home. So make sure they need to be part of this conversation. There are free webinars out there that you can find, and there's a lot of free information from some of these virtual providers. You don't even need to make an appointment. There's just information that's out there to help you understand and to help the other people in your life, your daughters, your sons, include them, because they may see changes that they don't necessarily understand. So I think it's important to bring them in, and the next generation will be better prepared, I think, to have the conversation and to know how to manage perimenopause and menopause. It's just a normal stage of a woman's reproductive life.
Can we click on the resources a little bit? I think particularly because our audience is majority very small businesses or sole proprietors for whom these free resources would probably be their first go-to. So can we just maybe go a little bit deeper on those?
Yeah, well, there's the Menopause Society, right, which is probably one of the most reliable and resources out there. It used to be called, I think, the North American Menopause Society. Now they've just renamed to the Menopause Society. Resources for providers, for individuals, for workplaces.
We have a whole workplace section, so it has posters and videos and resources for both employer and employees.
So you can download the information, you can post it in your workplace, you can
send it, share it.
Yep.
The other one that has some good resources, I wrote it down because it was the Society for Women's Health Research. Also has a really great section on workplace menopause resources for both employer and
it's free.
And it's free.
And it's free, yeah.
Yep.
And you mentioned the UK. Is theirs also
they
applicable
have
to U.S. employers?
They have a menopause pledge in the UK that you can just search for it, and it will come up. So this is something that a lot of employers in the UK are signing, and we don't have that in the US yet, but certainly individual employers can put in a menopause policy if they want to. Like, for example, we have lactation policies in the workplace, so why not a menopause policy, right?
Yeah.
I would also encourage you to talk to your providers around the information that they have and that they provide in their practices. I've gone to a provider organization here in Greater Portland. They have tons of information about childbirth, childcare, fertility, infertility. 2 years ago, there's nothing in there about menopause, nothing. And I said, how come you don't have any information in the bathroom about menopause? There's a ton of information in here about, breastfeeding. And I said, not every woman has a child or children, but every woman goes through menopause. So how about some information about that in here? I haven't been back. I don't know if it's there yet, but
well, they better have posters when you do come back.
I'm hoping there's at least one poster in the bathroom that talks about perimenopause and menopause. So, yeah, there is a lot of free information out there.
Allison, do you have something?
I would just say a more kind of like in the weeds practical reference, but just because I share these names with people a lot. But if you are on Instagram or listening to podcasts, Kelly Casperson is a name I would keep close by. She is a urogynecologist from Washington State, very much in the conventional world. She started to be she's kind of the mouthpiece now of conventional medicine, getting their act together with hormones. But it's helpful when someone references research and can speak that language. But she also does it so beautifully because she speaks it in a way anyone can understand. She has very quick blurbs, specific information. She has great resources. I send people to her a lot, providers and patients, because it crosses all those spectrums. But she does have podcasts. I think what I find it does is it helps women feel less alone or less confused, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is normal for everybody, and she gives you really good information. So Kelly Casperson is a name. I want to put in a plug too. Carrie Levine is a nurse midwife in the state of Maine who does functional medicine, and she wrote a book, Whole Woman Health. And that's just a nice book you can kind of run through, and it's kind of some of the lifestyle stuff and just basic stuff, but I would put those two pieces out there.
Yeah. She's great. I've read her book, and she happens to be my provider. So.
Oh, well, good. Shout out to Carrie. She's been doing this a long time.
She's just a lovely human being.
Yep. She knows her stuff.
So this is a question that somebody actually asked me to ask, which I don't know if I've got the right speakers to answer it, but maybe you might have encountered this in the workplaces around legal protections or obligations under U.S. law for menopause support.
So there's no protection for menopause specifically, but certainly for symptoms. The ADA, Americans with Disability Act, and then there are protections under that for if you're having symptoms and say you need to have a flexible work schedule or something like that to accommodate the symptoms that you're having that are due to menopause, then that's where the ADA would come in. So flexible work schedule, like a hybrid work schedule. There's probably protections under FMLA also. If you're an employer that has at least 50...
Family Medical Leave Act.
Family Medical Leave Act for yourself or for an immediate family member. There would be protections under that if you needed to take unpaid leave it's protected leave from the workplace. So those are a couple of, and then there's age also, some
discrimination.
Age discrimination laws as well. So I would look to those. Menopause in itself is not necessarily like protected, but the symptoms from menopause could be protected under some of those federal laws.
So when we talk about the physical space, because that's something I think everyone, regardless of what size company that you're in, that you might want to try to control. So what types of interventions can be put in place to make the work space more accommodating?
The biggest one is probably temperature. I would say the ability to control temperature. Open a window even. If you have the ability to do that, letting somebody go outside for a minute if they need some fresh air and cool air, those types of things. I think relative to body temperature, talked about uniforms, right, and breathable clothing, light, ability to control light. Again, these are all accommodations that can be made in the workplace, and employees need to ask for them usually, or just let if you're sole proprietor or a small business, just say, hey, can I step outside for a minute? Can I open a window? Can I put a fan on the counter or at my workstation? Those very small and inexpensive accommodations can make a big difference. Allison, do you have other? You
was gonna
mentioned
say-
a lot
I was
before,
gonna say
like
seating, ergonomics.
seating,
Yeah.
ergonomics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
those
I
are
think
all-
like adjustable workstations, if that's feasible, those are much, I think, more cost effective now than they were a few years ago after COVID. But the ability to change positions, change, just making sure like you're using the right equipment, for keyboards and your mouse, adjustable monitors, that sort of thing, chairs, just making sure that like if you have to sit all day, make sure you have a good supportive chair, or if you are someone who has to stand, like again behind a counter, like is there a stool that you can sit at to again just change, rest, those sorts of things, the anti-fatigue mat. I think like probably would benefit anyone, whether or not you're in menopause or not. But just kind of thinking about that versatile, like just our bodies are not made to be in one position for long periods of time. So just being able, that flexible space, I think is most important for all your workers.
Yeah. Breaks is another one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think giving people break time or taking break time yourself. If you're experiencing some symptoms, just to be able to go someplace and sit down, be quiet, not have to interact with anybody for for a second, can be really, really helpful. And breaks are actually something that need to be provided throughout the workday, but they can also be given as an accommodation if someone needs additional time in addition to the breaks that are legally required.
I would just add, a lot of women have irregular periods at this time and might not be expecting to have a period happening. So maybe making sure like tampons, if you want to be progressive, maybe a flex cup and pads are available, just so women can have that. So if you're at work and that's unexpected, you're not, feeling even more, awkward about things.
And free. You don't have to have a
Oh
quarter.
yeah, no, that please, that's fine. Yeah,
The machine.
Yeah. Who has a quarter? Yeah.
Right. I would say I wanted to add, I think one of the, when we're talking about symptoms that maybe we aren't recognizing, but I think one big one is just like noticing you're not able to kind of push through, skip lunch, like, oh, I didn't have breakfast, didn't have lunch, and now by 3:00 I'm crashing, I'm a hot mess, I can't remember my name. Like those sorts of things, like, you might have been able to get away with that in your 20s, like, oh, I don't need a lunch break, or, it is essential, one, to eat and regulate your blood sugar throughout the day, especially in this transition. But I think that is a big one. And so like just actually taking breaks, getting away from your workspace, like take advantage of the breaks that you're that are legally offered to you that a lot of people just skip because they have to get work done. That's so important. So I think like just recognizing when you need to take a break and not pushing through is huge.
And if you're a sole proprietor, just make yourself an appointment.
Yes, you have to do that. Don't
true.
skip meals. Allison's 100% right. Don't skip meals. Hydrate. Watch caffeine intake in the afternoon. Alcohol is another thing that can be very disruptive to sleep. So that glass or two of wine that you have over dinner, late in the day, can actually disrupt your sleep. So there's just some lifestyle things to keep in mind, but yeah, skipping meals is not a good idea. And people do that either because they're busy or, they just haven't planned for it. But for blood sugar regulation and just for regular health, make sure that you're eating a high quality, nutrient dense diet and not skipping meals.
That was one of the first symptoms I noticed, was that if I skipped meals or I wasn't hydrating effectively throughout the day, then certain times of my cycle, I would get a migraine. And then I learned that if I kept my blood sugar steady and I was well hydrated, that I often avoided that menstrual migraine. So, so what other hydration nutritional strategies would you recommend?
It's a tough one because I think everyone's different. I mean, no one wants to hear that. There are ways for us to figure out what our bodies like best, and what works at a certain point in life might change. So I think just being aware that if we're having symptoms that are showing us that there is something off in our diet, like feeling tired after you eat or tired in the afternoon, digestive symptoms, I do a lot of digestive health, that in and of itself can help alleviate a lot of the severity. If you have any kind of like skin reactions, that kind of thing, right? If there's anything saying to you, this might be something to do with food, there are ways to kind of figure out, there's like a big high protein trend right now, right? And I can't tell you the amount of women.
Cottage cheese.
Like I think humans have survived a while without eating like an entire cow each day, but I say that, just that I watch a lot of women change that to try to lose weight, but what we're losing is fiber and nutrients in our vegetables and fruits, and then their digestive health backs up, and then they get worse hormonal symptoms because we're not moving the hormones out through the gut. So there might be things that you're told you should do, and if you feel good, meaning you have good energy, you're peeing and pooping, you're sleeping, your mind's working well, those are kind of the basics to hit. If that's on, great, but if not, it might be like, wait, just because this works for one person, is it working for my body? But you can't go wrong with good healthy fats and whole grains and fruits and veggies and protein. I mean, truly, the less processed foods we have, usually the better.
Just eating.
Yeah. And eat.
Eating enough, gone are the days of like the Special K diet where you literally ate cereal for your
Or the grapefruit diet.
Or the grapefruit diet. Like we have to eat, the healthy fats, the fats, right? Like most of everyone hitting, perimenopause, menopause now grew up with the no fat.
Yeah. Snack wells.
Snack wells. The fat phobic decade. That's what I call it.
And we need fat, especially for that hormone production, for our brain health. It's so important. So healthy fats is just really healthy fat and fiber. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to add to that quickly, I see a lot of women and men, for that matter, that come in and they have high cholesterol. And, their providers are like, eat different, and, they're actually pretty healthy working out, but turns out, their hormones are so low, their body's holding on to cholesterol because that is one of the ingredients to produce hormones. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we can give our body the fuel it's actually looking for so we can avoid that end of things. But it's true, we don't need to be scared of healthy fats. That's an important tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found the hydration was, I think, the most, adding electrolytes, particularly in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I'll just do a shout out to a woman-owned business, Hey Freya. They have one of their founders is from Maine. And
really?
I really love their electrolytes. So women, clinician formulated.
I think it's rare often any of us are getting enough like fruits and veggies, and supplementing like that probably is helpful too. And as you're going through these big changes, you might need more of that support. So that's awesome. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, they're really great. I think that we might have some questions in the room. We still have 45 minutes left, and also on that note, for those of you in the room, there is hydration. There's tea and coffee cake and energy balls. Please feel free to get them whenever you need, and also use the bathroom, because I know we all need to do that more than our male counterparts.
Urgency is a common symptom of hormonal changes.
So why don't we pause with the questions that I have here and see if there's any questions in the group or online. So why don't we, Lucas, do we have any that have come in online yet? So why don't we start with a few online? If you can just shout them out for us.
First question is, what do you do about pain?
Pain.
What do you do about pain?
There are a lot of layers. So pain, determining where it's coming from, but let's talk about just hormonally speaking. As you decrease production of testosterone and estrogen, a known side effect is pain. However, there are probably things that could be contributing to that volume getting turned up. And Allison, probably default to you with your background, but not sleeping well, that's going to have more inflammatory process, foods we're eating. But hormonal decline, like I said, they just initiated this diagnosis code, which is a big deal because it means that you can get care and treatment. That musculoskeletal syndrome menopause just means there's more pain in the body, and that when you treat with hormones, there's so much more to it. I'm speaking to that because that I think is kind of the focus here. But if that is an issue and we address hormones, women do not often get offered testosterone. I work with testosterone in my practice. It is a game changer. I have women who come in who've been on estrogen and progesterone, but they're still not feeling totally dialed in. It's like you do one, you tune up one instrument in the symphony and it sounds okay, but if you can tune all of them up, that's often a missing link for women with a lot of factors. So I would just say getting a comprehensive overview of looking at where's the pain coming from, what are the factors that are impacting your body, and addressing them one by one, I think you get a lot more traction.
Does bone loss play a role?
In pain?
Well, in pain, and then just osteoarthritis related to hormones, and I know that I'm osteopenic now, and not having any hormone therapy until recently. I'm just wondering if that's played a role. And I notice, like, when I go out and run, I sort of feel like my back is uncomfortable. I have more pain after that.
I think that's the piece where, like, we get covered with estrogen, maybe progesterone. But like I said, the testosterone is a big piece because there's receptors in the muscles, joints and muscles, tissue, also even estrogen at the right doses. So there's a lot to do with that. I think, like Allison was saying earlier, we're used to pushing ourselves through things, and when we're not honoring what our body needs, we can kind of push past that. But, dietary stuff, gut health, sleeping well, and hormones, I would say, are the biggest factors I see for working with pain. And if there are past injuries, I work with peptides and that kind of thing, but I think to kind of keep it on this focus area, there are some really significant layers. If you're not getting the entire balance of hormones, you could be missing out on that piece. There's no better treatment clinically for osteoporosis or osteopenia than estrogen. They are studying testosterone because they are seeing a connection. We just don't have the studies yet. So
interesting.
But
yeah, I'd say the other things are hydration for pain and joint pain, muscle pain. Like a lot of people are chronically dehydrated, so making sure you're drinking your fluids. And motion is lotion, and which is really tricky with pain, because if we're in pain, we don't really feel like exercising, or we can't. But moving our bodies is, the number one thing for, in addition to supporting our hormones, but getting exercise and just figuring out what that looks like for you is really, really important in moving our bodies. I think we're just so sedentary because our lives now are in front of a screen for most of the day. And so I think just, and if you aren't able to exercise or move because of pain, shout out to physical therapy. There might be an imbalance in your in some strength and some range of motion, and our bodies are really good at trying to adapt until they can't anymore. And so getting support and guidance, I think, is just so key.
Should we take one more online and then we'll move to the room?
How can women best advocate for their menopause needs on the job?
Sorry, what was?
How can women best advocate for their needs at work?
I would say, if you work for a large employer, start with your benefits area and human resources. That would be the first place to go, because they're really the ones who own the programs or the resources, or at a minimum are administering your medical plan. So that, I would say, is a starting point for mid-size to large-size employers. But if there's anyone in for a smaller employer, and you do offer medical benefits, I would start there, because this is where is there coverage for menopause care? Are there virtual providers? What's covered under your pharmacy benefit plan? Asking some of those questions, I think, can lead to an answer that perhaps maybe even your HR or benefits folks don't know. Because this is still emerging. I think this conversation is still emerging in the U.S. and with employers, and even with large employers. They are just getting started with this. So it's not something that's necessarily trickled down to small and mid-sized employers yet. So if there is an owner or a benefits professional within your organization, I would say start there. And then look to, again, there are oftentimes employee resource groups, ERGs, or employee networks. Those are other places to go for information, or to at least start some advocacy and conversation around perimenopause and menopause. A lot of large employers have employee resource groups or employee networks, these affinity groups.
For the small businesses, perhaps, if you're part of an association, like the restaurant association or someone, maybe start with that.
Sure. And the Menopause Society, in Menopause at Work section, they actually have some talking points and some resources to like how to start the conversation, I think, which is helpful.
All right. Why don't we go to, does anybody have a question in the room? Start us off.
Good morning. My name is Leslie Willett. I too am a registered dietitian, and I love that you're bringing up the whole point of skipping meals and regulating blood sugar. I do want to put a plug that the majority, if not 99% of commercial health insurance plans cover visits with a dietitian with no out-of-pocket costs. So that's another resource for small, medium, and large businesses. You can see a dietitian for nothing. So with that said, how does menopause impact metabolism, and how can we support those metabolic changes? So before we started, we were talking amongst ourselves and bringing up the GLP-1s. So, and I've heard of microdosing and things like that. Can you speak to how all that relates and how we can keep women healthier metabolically? That was a lot, sorry.
That was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and thank you for mentioning the coverage for nutrition counseling. So this is something that is required by the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, for certain diagnoses. It's covered 100%. This is mandated, so it is then no out-of-pocket cost to the plan member, and something that we promote at Unum. The other thing within plan design that you have to look for is sometimes there are visit limits. Removing any visit limits is if you're self-funded and you can do that, remove visit limits for care. So again, thank you. That's awesome. Making sure that people are aware of that. And then when it comes to metabolism, one of the the other side effects that we hear a lot about with menopause and perimenopause is weight gain.
Yeah.
So Allison, do you want to talk about that?
Again, you guys are going to get sick of me saying this, but
GLP-1's really hot topic,
Yeah, and understandably so, right? You're going through all these changes and your body is not responding the way it used to, and all the things that used to work don't work, and you're feeling like I'm careening out of control here. And again, it's not a popular answer because this is not easy to make cookie cutter, but there are some main factors that contribute to metabolism and body changes, and then there's some individual things. When I work with people, I do like a really long intake and I have a comprehensive set of labs. What I'm looking for is like the major boulders upstream that are kind of causing downstream things. But at this age and this developmental stage, the really common things are, one, we start not sleeping as well. And when we don't sleep as well, we do typically start to gain weight. That's a side effect due to stressors. Like cortisol will put fat right around the belly. And that's a protective measure, thank you, body, but not one we always want. So this is a snowball, like we were talking about. This is a snowball. So I'm going to share these with the understanding that we can't just do one thing usually. GLPs are very enticing because of that, GLP-1s, but some people are good candidates, some people aren't. And the factors that we can look at is getting good sleep, eating good healthy foods on a regular basis. But the other thing is with hormones, when hormones decline, the body's like, oh, I know how I can help. I can store fat because that's where we make hormones. Again, it happens in men and women. The body fat, body composition changes are also compounded by the fact that when testosterone declines, that's the first hormone to kind of drop off for women. That starts to drop off like in our 30s usually. That changes the way that muscle development happens because the body is stimulated by testosterone in the muscles. And then when we build more muscle, we just by nature usually kind of burn more fat. If we account for those factors just baseline, and figuring out, are you eating the way that fuels your body well? Because that's something that is individual for everybody. So those things right there, that's what I start with. I mean, I work with a lot of people where a lot of their goals are body composition. GLP-1s are a tool. I do actually microdosing with people. It's something that can be helpful for things like addiction, anxiety, inflammation, maintaining weight loss. I'm not against GLP-1s by any means. It's not my main thing. I don't jump into it because what I find is I usually am able to help people with the other metabolic supports that fuel that without having to go down that road. I think they can be used responsibly, but I think there's a lot of clinics out there that just put people on them. They're not well supported. They don't look at those other underlying issues. They go too fast. They get side effects. I have seen people get pretty severe side effects. And then it's like, well, what are you going to do when that stops? We are going through a major legal issue right now with who can make the GLP-1s, who can't. And so a lot of people are now finding they're not going to have coverage. So now all of a sudden, what are we going to do because we didn't address the underlying foundational life factors? I think they can be used as a good tool. There's a lot of metabolic support that we can use that are clinically based, that are really effective. The way we eat, what we eat, those are big things, and hormonal balance. And there's some other kind of supports that I use as supplements that I'll go to before GLP-1s usually, but.
And I think resisted training, so weight training, I think again, like we're in our 20s, 30s, we can just like hop on the Peloton or the treadmill, drop that 5 pounds, like reset. And that doesn't happen in menopause. It can actually make things worse. So really making sure that strength training is a part of to build muscle, to burn that fat and burn those calories is not only helpful for your weight and metabolic health, but also for your heart, brain, and bone health can't go wrong.
It's hard to separate from what we got away with in our 20s and 30s, and what's in our head that we could do and should do, and then making that transition into what we need to do in midlife.
And I think also I think we're in this age of just so much information. It's like, okay, I got to do all this weight training, and I got to, meditate, and I got to get on the Peloton, and I got to do all these
400 grams of protein.
And I have to run my company, or,
I got a cold plunge, I got a sauna, there's a lot to do. And so that in itself, of that never-ending to-do list in the back of your mind, all it does is it just raises those stress hormones, and your body is saying, oh, wow, she's really stressed. I'm going to just save all this belly fat so that because she's running from a tiger and we need to survive. And so it can backfire. And so I think when I'm working with women, it's really figuring out, okay, what's working, what's not. Can we take some things off the plate, the non-essentials, and really what is feeling good in your body, because what works for one person is not going to work for another person, because your lives are very different. And those demands on your life and your time and your energy are all different. So I think it is it's so hard right now because there's so much information. It's so generalized. It's like, oh, well, I'll just do GLP-1s, or I'll just start weightlifting. But it really depends.
I want to say one other thing quickly about that made me think. So gut health is really, really important for weight, and I'm trying to keep myself on the rails, not talking about gut health too much today, but it's huge. And again, with clinical data, we know that there's a connection when gut health is not in balance, that there is more weight gain associated. But the GLP-1 piece is, that works on certain pathways with blood sugar and insulin. So some people that might not even be the issue. But gut health-wise, if you use a GLP-1, you're more at risk for things like constipation, nausea, vomiting. Some people, again, they put all their eggs in that basket and they're like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then they start and it doesn't work well because they have side effects. So sometimes you just can't even use that tool even if you want to. So back to the basics at that point.
And bringing back to the workplace with gut health and nutrition, right? Offer better morning snacks.
Yes.
Women are not going to do well if all they're fed is donuts and coffee in the morning, right?
Right.
So,
Good point.
How can you also put that food, for those of you that are feeding your employees and feeding yourself, maybe just touch really quick on what other options should they have available?
Well, anything other than donuts. Listen, a good donut is fine once in a while, but I think the environment plays a huge role in the choices that people make. If you are providing food for your employees, make sure that it's healthy, nutrient-dense food or snacks, and hydration. It doesn't cost anything to put in a infused water cooler. So that people have that cue to drink, and yourself too, right? I think that those are some really easy things that an employer can do to make the environment conducive to healthy eating and hydration. It's important to be thoughtful about that and what that looks like. It could be a fruit bowl.
I think over at the Dempsey Center that they're building at Rock Row, they partnered with LB Kitchen, small business, and they have a market, and so they have really healthy food options. And obviously healthy food can be more expensive for sure, but I think there are ways, especially if you were going to try to partner with a local business that makes healthy food, maybe it could be here's our price point, what can you do? But to be able to provide that is huge. That's a great point.
Another question from the audience here? But that's so that they can hear you online.
I work with a bunch of women, but I'm not in corporate. And I find that mental health, you mentioned heart palpitations, anxiety, and adult ADHD comes out a lot during perimenopause. I'm just wondering on how to support it, and like if it happens like on the job, you know, how do you go about helping with that process? So it's not necessarily like a one-time symptom, but it could be something that is leading up to it where we're, you know, working in a stressful situation.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and not to be morbid, but I do want to point out that the highest rate of suicide for women is between 45 and 55, and I do not think that's a coincidence, because we start feeling these things like feeling anxious or irritable or ragey, and we're trying to suppress that and be like, no, everything's fine, and people in our life look to us to make everything fine, and the pressure valve comes off at some point. So first of all, normalizing it, talking about it, finding community, providing these discussions at work, again, like maybe a monthly thing where women, you know, are able to access. But truly, if there is consistent symptoms, ADHD symptoms show up around the time of hormone changes because there is a connection with estrogen. There is a connection with the drop in estrogen, and then that happens long term when we move into menopause. So if that is consistent, working with someone who's a professional who knows what they're doing helps, because if it's we know that this change happens with the brain when we're moving into menopause, where it's almost like trimming the hedges, and it's kind of realigning the things that are most important. I like to call it wisdom, and it's something that we do naturally, but that isn't long. It's not supposed to be long lasting. That is something that your brain rewires to the most important things for us to focus on as women. However, that's different than someone who has ongoing symptoms, depression, anxiety, ADHD-like symptoms. That I would say I see all the time in my practice, and it really benefits if someone's hormonally deficient to address those things. Of course, there's other things we can do, like mindfulness practices, getting good support, having community. Those are big. There's, you know, supplements you can do, all those things. But truly, if you have hormone deficiencies and they're not addressed, we're not producing more hormones anytime soon. Like, we are just continuing to drop. So some people start here when we go into perimenopause and menopause, right? And that drop is like this. But if you have had reasons why you're starting out lower and then you're dropping, that's even more severe. And you've already seen it. It's just it hasn't been supported for you. Medicine does a horrible job with hormone support. So you could have heavy periods, infertility, frequent periods, non-existent periods. You know, these cycle changes happen before we even hit perimenopause and menopause, and then we just drop off the cliff. I think for those things, if someone has consistent symptoms, they haven't been evaluated for hormones, I think it's worth doing. But there's obviously other things as well.
In this situation.
In the moment, which kind of, give me a symptom.
I'm a chef, and I work in, like, when we're doing a job.
Yes.
And we're like lucky. I have an awesome group of
40-year-old
women.
Yes.
And sometimes hot flashes come on.
Yes.
Or it's like, you know, you're in the moment, and it's abnormal nervousness
that
comes about.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering, when it's in that moment, you mentioned supplements, or like try to be, I always give them noons, like, you know, how do we work through this?
Yes.
Kind of in it together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, so in the moment, just repeating for people that she wasn't on the mic, so what can you do in the moment for those symptoms like hot flashes and other things?
I think Allison will probably have some contributions too, but what I want to mention to that is it happens in the moment, but it's not usually a one-time thing. So if we're trying to respond just in the moment, we're missing the opportunity, though it's important to have some tools. There might be some breathing exercises, there might be some things we can do to manage stress so that fight or flight isn't up here. But I will say, if hot flashes are happening on a regular basis, we're going to avoid that if we have someone address it with hormone therapy if that's needed. Because the other thing with hot flashes is we now know that if you have hot flashes, it correlates with a higher cardiovascular risk down the road. So if we're not addressing that, and that is something that's happening just once, fine, once in a while, but I think if it's happening regularly, in addition to the in-the-moment strategies, having hormone evaluation is good. But there certainly are things that help with better sleep. They help with hot flashes if it works, and then probably stress management and lifestyle stuff, I think probably is helpful.
Yeah, I think one thing that yes, like breathing exercises in the moment, like just being able to take 5 really nice, slow diaphragmatic breaths can help you get out of that fight or flight in the moment. And then I'd also just think about like if you're doing like events, for example, is just thinking about how you're buffering that event. Like, is there some space, right? Because usually it's like you're down to the last minute and then it's like the event and then you're like, okay, we're in it. So it's like that build up. So it's like, what can you do to support, you know, as a group of like, how do we like ground ourselves before we're going into this event maybe as something so that it's not like this high pressure situation all the way up until the actual event. But I think, you know, mindfulness practice, like non-essential stuff. So like getting out, like weeding, you know, what's going into, you know, whether that's what else is on that schedule that week or, you know, that lead up, I think is creating more space helps that nervous system, because the nervous system is controlling everything and it's being influenced by the hormone changes. So anything you can do to support the nervous system in the moment. And then it's like, right, like if everyone's just surviving on coffee, that's just gonna like throwing, you know, kerosene onto the fire. So, you know, having herbal teas or other electrolytes and other things that can support your staff during that time, I think.
And supporting each other.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's a big piece of it. And giving people the space and comfort to be able to say, hey, I'm having a moment. I need 5 minutes. Can you cover for me? And people feeling that that's okay, I think is really, really important. And it can, you know, help that person. But then you have that community of other women who are saying, hey, I've got your back and, you know, we're good. I think that that's also a part of this, and that starts with having the conversation, creating that safe space to do so, and feeling that, you know, people are supported.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd be happy, I don't know if it's helpful, I'd be happy to throw, like, if we're going to provide resources, like, here's some supplements you could consider. Like, very general, but yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, gather some information. So it's one more question here, and then we'll go back to the...
My name is Roxy Sugar, and you know, it's true that I'm gonna. One of the things you mentioned very briefly, breathable clothing. Our biggest organ is our skin, and I don't think there's enough education out there for women or men of what they're putting on their bodies. Mm-hmm. And if you have anything oil derivative on your body, if you've got 20% polyester in that sweatshirt, you're going to be way more uncomfortable when you have that hot flash if it's instead of all natural plant-based. And I think that, you know, the other thing too that I feel is very important is that more botanically curious information is fed into this discussion, because, you know, there are so many wonderful plant-based natural supplements that can help in all of these things. And I think the reliance that, first we go to the medical field, yes, that's a part of it. But I think the medical field doesn't always give us that holistic approach that's not only going to be best for our bodies. I mean, if you have hot flashes, you need to control your temperature. And how you do that with what's on your skin. Mm-hmm. And it's more than breathability, it's versatility. Can you control your neck, your forearm, your calves to stay in your happy place? And that started for me in 20s, 30s. And so as my progression as a woman and aging, I see how important that is, but how so many people have no knowledge. They think rayon is the same as nylon and polyester. They have no knowledge. So I would like to hear more from y'all on your thoughts toward natural, I mean, you know, brain fog. I've been doing a lion's mane now for years and would be lost without it. So I think I'd like to hear more in that vein of what you would recommend for women.
And plug for Roxy. Roxy owns Sugar, and she
Not only that, with great stretch, so that if you're a little up, you're a little down, you don't can't put your pants on that day. You don't want that. You don't need that. We don't have time for it. So thank you, Amy. But, you know, and made locally too. So decisions that are good for the planet, ourselves, all of it. But
I think in one of the last events, I was wearing some of
Well, and the other thing too is plastic particles in our water, and what is all of those external environmental factors that are also impacting us as we go through these stages.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really gave you a direct question. But
No, that's I know. Raw
clothing, herbs,
botanical
yeah.
herbs, homeopathic, all those things we can do that maybe aren't going to hormone replacement therapy.
And for those of you, for those of you in the room, please stay. Paula is here and can do some, little mini consulting with you on herbs, and many of the herbs that I'm sure that this panel will mention are right there behind us. And for those of you online, she's open most days, I think Wednesday through Sunday, to come in and talk to her as well. She's here in downtown Portland. So just another plug for 2 local businesses there. So.
That's awesome. The clothing, really important. My husband bought me the best bamboo pajamas for Christmas this year, and it was a game changer for me.
That's what I bamboo.
It was,
and it's nice for the environment.
Yeah, and it just comfortable, soft, breathable, all those things, and
also good for the day, not just the
well, on the weekends I do wear them around the house.
Yeah, well, you want to be that comfortable at work.
Yes.
Where you're really putting it out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And, dressing in layers also, scarves, natural fabrics, all of that. We were talking a little bit about, supplements and before we started, and adaptogens, and I know you do some of that, Allison.
I do a lot, and I really want to acknowledge that supplements play a huge role in my practice, huge. Again, it's hard to say just this one, right? Because everyone's different, but there are definitely a host of supplements that are pretty common in the lineup of what I use. Vitamin D in New England is paramount, and I have yet to have anyone who is optimal in vitamin D without supplementing, to be honest. Just some people need different doses. I recommend, and I hesitate to kind of do too much recommending, but I usually recommend 5,000 IUs a day. I only bring that up to say most people in their multivitamins like 400 IUs. I measure the numbers with people, so I keep a close eye. Some people need even more because they are not optimal from there. A good B complex, it needs to be methylated. B vitamins run the entire system. These are foundational nutrients. So it's a lot. I try to really minimize what I share with people because I don't want to have them feel overwhelmed with taking too many supplements, but the things that really run the system, magnesium has a role as well. The kind is different for everyone what might be best because you don't want to have to take 100 supplements. And the other thing that I focus a lot on that I prioritize right away is gut health. So that has its own role and it's different for everyone. Those would be like foundational things. There's a supplement I use. I'll do a link, the supplement site that I use. I have all these recommendations in it, so I can do a link to that so you can just look up and see. But there's one from a company that I use that has some natural support for hot flashes. So a lot of women are coming to me because they are interested in hormone therapy. We know now hormone therapy does not carry the risk they used to say. But for people who are like, I'm not quite there, I want to avoid that for some reason, there are definitely some good supplements that help address those things. And I'm happy to share those resources. But for sure, I do not want to minimize the role. I do a lot of supplements. It's just I individualize them to each person.
And they can be expensive, and I would say that, ask your employer or look to your benefits because there are flexible spending accounts, health savings accounts that will, and some employers, I'm sure Unum probably has some pot of money too that people can use for anything health related. And so those supplements, while not covered under your health insurance, most likely maybe there's another way to cover the cost.
Yeah, I have a lot of women use HSAs for everything, really.
Yeah, and I think another good point is, as our skin being the largest organ in our body, is also looking at your personal products, whether it's your soaps, your lotions, your makeup. There are so many toxins, and those are hormone disruptors. And so those could also, it's just, again, like thinking, it's just so there's just so many things that go into our hormones and how we're feeling, and it just is all exacerbated, I think, in perimenopause and menopause. Like there's just a big light, shining on it. So it is just taking a look at the products that you're using. Like I don't know the actual stat, but it's like a woman is like exposed to like 60 something toxins within like the first 2 hours of being awake because between all of our beauty products, our soaps, our Scented candles, like all of these things are a huge player in reproductive health for the whole lifespan, not just in perimenopause, but I think it's just the light gets really shined on all of those things.
So as an employer, you can look at what is the soaps that
Yeah.
are, you
Exactly.
Take the Febreze out of the bathroom.
Are you using air fresheners, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
get these chemical products out because they're just they're endocrine disruptors, they're
Yes.
hormone disruptors.
Yes.
So they're
Yeah.
going to mess with your hormones just by
Yeah.
themselves. You're already messing with them enough yourself.
Yeah.
So why do you need something
Exactly.
else?
Walking into some stores.
Walking into your store if you have a real retail
like
shop.
I can't when you
Yep.
make sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
The detergent aisle in the grocery store is
Yeah.
the worst.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So why don't we go to doing more questions online? I'm guessing. Let's start.
There's one more. You did well to answer one of the questions, but there was an add-on question, so I'll read the original and then the add-on. You're discussing continuing to eat meals regularly, but I'm noticing I'm just not as hungry in perimenopause and not enjoying the feeling of fullness in my belly that used to be a flat stomach and gaining some weight. Skipping meals seems like a natural evolution right now when not as hungry and gaining weight. Help what to do. And then there's a follow-up that was, what about topical estrogen? Does that help for weight gain or for weight?
I'm not hungry.
meals?
I'm not hungry
Yeah.
anymore.
I think, for, eating in general is, also just like, are you taking time to eat your meals? Are you chewing your food? Like our digestion starts, when we look at our meal, not just eating it as we're reading emails or, doing 3 other things at the same time. So really making sure you're giving yourself time to eat, enjoying your food. Maybe for some, maybe smaller meals, and eating more frequently. And I think like taste changes, our cravings change, how we're reacting or how foods make us feel change during this time as well. And so just being curious and maybe trying some new things can be helpful. I think that's, and just, like there's, obviously a billion resources online for, new recipes or that sort of thing, but I think that piece is huge. And if you are someone who's like chronically skipping meals or ignoring that hunger cue, your body is just like, cool, she doesn't care about that. I'm gonna like just turn down the volume of that cue. And so sometimes when we can be more intentional and bringing some, being a little bit more intentional about our meals and our meal times, that can play a huge role in kind of turning up that volume again in our
Mindful eating.
Yeah.
It's important. Appetite changes as you get older. That's a factor. Dentition changes as you get older, so the ability to chew some things may change, and therefore things like a crunchy apple may just not be as appealing. So sometimes rather than biting into an apple, slice it up. There are normal changes, but being mindful and intentional about your eating and not skipping meals, small meals, absolutely. I know my appetite has changed significantly from when I was in my 20s and 30s to, I don't eat as much. I'm at the stage where my husband and I, when we go out to eat, we split a meal. And variety is important too, because that's one of the things that makes a meal appealing. A variety of colors, flavors, textures on your plate is part of what makes something interesting and is also satisfying. So those are some techniques. And then being physically active. That's also something that will stimulate your appetite. So going out for a walk, getting some type of activity on a daily basis is also important.
Yeah,
What about the estrogen question? I want to make sure we get to that. Does that help you lose weight?
It can, for sure. I want to say this, and I want to be really clear. Hormones are not a silver bullet of like, hormones cause weight loss. They can enhance weight loss, for sure. But what I want to really point out is if you are low in estrogen or symptomatic, most women are good candidates for hormone therapy, and we now know that hormone therapy equates to living longer, living better. I mean, it is that clear. There are women who aren't candidates for some very specific reasons, but it's no longer, oh, my mom had breast cancer or this or that. But I do want to say that what I find in my practice with hormone therapy is that it's the bridge that helps women, if they need them and they're good candidates, it helps them do those things that they want to do to help with weight loss or any other thing. I mean, we're talking to that question specifically. Does estrogen help? Yes. You can have more energy, you have less hot flashes. If you go get sweaty when you're working out and you are having hot flashes, that's not ideal sometimes. Even just the storage of fat in the abdominal area to help promote hormone production can be helped. I very rarely do estrogen on its own. I often do estrogen and testosterone for women. So for me, it's hard to separate them out, but it's better than nothing. The other thing is if you're sleeping better because you're using estrogen, that can help. But the thing I find that medicine's really missing is that hormones are helpful for symptoms, for sure, but also it's really helpful because it's that snowball effect. When you start sleeping better, you want to get up and work out more, you have more energy and endurance, you recover better. So if your testosterone's low and you go and work out and you're exhausted or sore, those things all contribute. So yes, with caveats, but certainly if you have, I look at numbers, not everybody does. I do look at levels. If someone's low or they're symptomatic and you're a good candidate, you should talk with someone who knows what they're doing to figure out if it's a good tool.
You know, I think in conversations I've had too with women is most women don't know that we have estrogen receptors all over our body, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere. It's not just in our, female reproductive system,
Definitely.
right?
The heart, the brain, same with testosterone too. Those receptors are everywhere. And they're certainly felt in all those systems, but we just don't always equate it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Over 400 functions in our body.
Do we have more questions online? We're running out of time. I want to make sure we get them.
Questions that I see, please let me know if I missed one on the chat.
Okay, great. Any other questions here? Yeah, I think Holly had a question.
You don't have your
Hi, I'm Holly. I am curious. So I work with a traditional primary care provider under my employee-provided insurance plan, and I have really struggled with hormone questions that I've surfaced in those environments. Do you have recommendations? I recognize that you two of you provide these services in more of an alternative to traditional insurance plans, but for somebody that's in that sort of rigid system, like how can I get to this place with my doctor that I'm not getting to and that I've beaten the drum on over and over?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips or any strategies or any recommendations?
The first thing I would say is, I said Kelly Casperson earlier, but I would say that again, but she really focuses a lot more on the menopausal end of things. To be honest, there's not a lot of great resources about women who are still cycling, who are having hormonal issues. You can start to kind of look for them out there and find the talking points. But I would also say that there are providers, like it's so hard because you develop a relationship with a provider. If it's a primary care and you're really not getting anywhere, maybe you go see a GYN who might know what they're doing. I think unfortunately this is why, it's job security for me because I see a lot of women because they're not getting their needs met, but I wish it were not the case and that they had better care in primary care. So I would say one is if you're hitting walls, maybe it's worth finding someone else, and you could keep your PCP but go see someone and asking around, asking friends. Some women talk about these things, some women don't. Anyone who's doing bioidentical hormones, anyone who's doing functional medicine, there might be people who do accept insurance.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's a possibility. And you can do that in addition to seeing your primary care without having to make that an issue. Because if people in this day and age in primary care and GYN and OBGYN are not recognizing that things have changed about hormones and they're not making an effort to educate themselves, I think it says something. I know.
I agree.
I wish I had a better answer. I wish I did.
I have an answer.
Yes.
Can we mic her?
Yes.
Yeah. We have an answer in the room.
I saw my primary care doctor 2 months ago with the same result. Like I had every other symptom on this list except for hot flashes. But night sweats are kind of a hot flash.
Yes.
She told me because I wasn't having hot flashes that it wasn't perimenopause and there wasn't anything she could do for me. I cried. And then I went and saw my OBGYN, so I was already a patient of hers, but Dr. Noble at Intermed takes this really seriously.
Oh, great.
They take insurance. I know it's hard to get in at Intermed, like it is at any, but there are resources in Maine of people who take insurance. And she was already my OBGYN. I've never had children, so I don't see her that often, so it was just getting in and getting an appointment. I cried in that appointment too when I was talking to the nurse. But then she came in, I think the nurse told her that I cried, and she was like, let's go. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through that again. And it was so validating. But yeah, that experience, it infuriated me with my PCP. She's younger than I am. She should know a little bit more. but no hot flashes means it wasn't real. And my biggest concern was, okay, it's not perimenopause. All this other shit is happening. If it's not that, what is it?
Go on birth control.
Yeah, so
Yeah. It's such a gaslight right now. It's really, but I'm really glad you found someone. And I want to just mention too, I think there are people in the field right now in this area, there are people who stand out that might be hard to get in to see Robin. But the other thing is, just because someone's not working directly with insurance, if you have the ability to have a super bill generated, I do that for people. I use HSAs and I generate super bills. I'm not the only one who does that. There's a lot of people who do what I do and offer that. It's not realistic for everyone. I want to acknowledge that, but if it is something that allows you to bridge that gap, a lot of people assume there's going to be a high cost, but I think sometimes when you are hitting walls and you can't find anyone in conventional medicine, sometimes when you hear what the cost is and you understand how well you feel after, it might be able to be worth it for someone with those factors. I don't want to minimize that. It's not realistic for everyone.
And OBGYN care is covered under, it's required to be covered under your insurance. So you can go see them, I believe, without a referral, even if you have an HMO. And I can just say that the provider that I see, who's a certified nurse midwife, I had her do my pap smears, and that visit was covered. I wasn't, not directly, I had to get the super bill and submit it, but that had to be covered even though she was not a provider that was covered under the insurance.
In network.
In network with the,
yeah. And the other thing is with insurance. So a lot of these virtual providers are also could be within your network. It depends on who your carrier is. I went outside of my brick and mortar provider because when I went to my OBGYN, first it was, well, here's a book you can read. Okay, well, that's sort of helpful. And then I was asked,
because I'm not sleeping, I'll stay up and read this book.
Are your symptoms debilitating? And I'm like, because I was asking about hormone replacement therapy. And I got, the most they would do were vaginal suppositories. And I'm like, well, debilitating, how do you define debilitating, right? And I think that just depends. So I actually then went outside to a virtual provider, and I still do that now.
Yeah, you mentioned specific virtual providers early on. If you could share those.
Yeah, they'll be in the...
We'll share a list of virtual providers in the follow-up email. That you'll get once we have the recording from this.
And I have some information up here on, who Cigna uses. And they use Visana. Aetna uses Ovia. United Healthcare uses Maven. They're all different. And you can just call the number on the back of your insurance card and ask also to see if they have... and a lot of these providers started out as family building and fertility, and now they've expanded into offering menopause care. And it's not just HRT. It's the other lifestyle pieces that be beneficial. So
we are out of time. These ladies are going to stay for a little while. Paul is here available to talk about herbal medicine as well. So please, if you're in the room, stay and ask your questions then. Thank you to everyone online. Again, thank you to Maine Community Bank for sponsoring this event. And we'll take a break for the summer, and IndieBiz ED will be back in the fall. And I would just say that we make these events open and free to anyone to attend. However, we are a 501c3 organization, so we do take tax-deductible donations, and we very much appreciate any support that can be thrown our way to continue to produce these. We are all volunteer-led at this organization as well. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the fall.